the liquid fortress, the forbidden hydrotechnology of Petra. Most history advice is lying to you, and that is why your understanding of the past is stuck in a loop of misinformation that feels comfortable but is fundamentally hollow. The narrative we have been fed for centuries suggests that the Nabateans were simply lucky nomads, incense traders who stumbled upon a hidden canyon and decided to carve some elaborate tombs into the sandstone. We are told they grew wealthy by taxing caravans and used that wealth to hire architects who mimicked the Greeks and Romans. But this story is not just a mistake. It is a carefully maintained exit from the truth. If you look at the evidence through the lens of advanced fluid dynamics and atmospheric harvesting, you realize that Petra was never just a city. It was a high-frequency water management machine. This desert was not a wasteland to the Nabateans. It was a resource. To understand the world they built, you have to stop thinking of Petra as a collection of beautiful buildings and start seeing it as a massive, functional heart of a hydrological network. Imagine a world where a city of 30,000 people thrives in a landscape where it almost never rains. Yet every citizen has access to fresh, running water, public fountains, and even lush gardens. The Rose-Red City was not an artistic statement. It was a survival system engineered with a precision that defies the tools of the era. The Nabateans didn't just live in the desert, they hacked it. You have probably noticed that the most impressive structure, the treasury, or Al-Khazna, is carved directly into the rock face at the end of a narrow, winding gorge. Mainstream archaeology tells you this was a tomb for a king. But if you examine the internal chambers and the way the sandstone interacts with the morning sun, you see the hallmarks of a thermal regulator. The rock itself acts as a massive heat sink, and the narrow Psychicode entrance to the Sidioka functions as a cooling venturi, pulling air through the canyon to maintain a constant temperature. This was the first layer of their technology, climate control through geological architecture. But the real mystery is the water. In a region that receives less than 4 inches of rain a year, the Nabateans managed to control every single drop with such efficiency that not a thimbleful was ever wasted. They didn't just build cisterns. They created a pressurized piping system that used gravity and ceramic filters to transport water across miles of jagged terrain. If we took this seriously, we would realize that the Nabateans possessed a knowledge of hydraulics that wouldn't be seen again for 2,000 years. They understood the behavior of water how it moves, how it stores energy, and how it can be harvested from the very air itself. This brings us to the terrifying reality of their flash flood management. In the desert, a sudden storm is a death sentence. A wall of water can rush through the canyons, obliterating everything in its path. But the Nabateans didn't fear the floods, they invited them. They built a series of dams and diversion tunnels that turned a destructive force into a calculated refill for their subterranean reservoirs. This wasn't primitive engineering. This was a sophisticated algorithm written in stone. By the time the water reached the city center, its velocity had been stripped away, its sediment filtered, and its energy stored. The brain hates unfinished ideas, and the largest mystery of the Nabatean civilization is where they acquired this specialized knowledge. They appeared in the historical record almost overnight, already in possession of advanced stone-cutting techniques and hydraulic expertise. They didn't evolve, they arrived. In the world of alternative history, this suggests they were a splinter unit of the same founders who mapped the Nazca lines and positioned the bluestones of Stonehenge. They were the masters of the liquid grid. They understood that water is not just something you drink. It is a medium for information and energy. You might have noticed that the carvings in Petra are not just decorative. Many of the channels and niches that line the sick are designed to catch the heavy dew that forms in the early morning hours. This is atmospheric harvesting. By using specific mineral coatings on the sandstone, the Nabateans were able to pull moisture directly out of the desert air. The city was a giant sponge, designed to stay hydrated even during a decade-long drought. The world we live in today is a world of waste, where we pump water from thousands of miles away only to let it evaporate. But the Nabatean world was a closed loop of absolute efficiency. The psychological reality of Petra is that it was a fortress of silence and abundance in a world of chaos. While the surrounding empires were fighting over fertile valleys and riverbanks, the Nabateans sat in their stone-carved laboratory, untouchable and self-sufficient. They didn't need the Nile or the Euphrates. They had mastered the hidden currents of the desert. This made them the ultimate threat to the centralized powers of the era. A civilization that doesn't need external resources is a civilization that cannot be managed. This is why the Roman Empire was so obsessed with absorbing Thymacanaut for their incense, but for their hardware. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the feeling of standing in the center of Petra is one of profound, managed peace. You are surrounded by millions of tons of sandstone, yet the air is cool and the sound of trickling water follows you everywhere. This was the relatability effect of the ancient world. The citizens of Petra weren't living in a cave. They were living inside a masterpiece of biomimicry. Every arch, every column, and every hidden pipe was part of a larger organism that breathed with the desert. Think about the monastery, or Ad-Dair, located high above the city. It requires a climb of 800 steps to reach. Mainstream history says it was another temple, but its location at the highest point of the plateau suggests it was the control tower. From here, the Nabatean technicians could monitor the weather patterns across the entire Wadi Rum. They were the meteorologists of the ancient world, using the resonance of the canyons to predict storms days before they arrived. They were the operators of a hydrological early warning system that ensured the Sidioko's reservoirs were always prepared. The transition from a nomadic tribe to a master engineering caste is the part nobody warns you about. We are told the Nabateans adapted, but the precision of their tunnel sokosome, of which run for hundreds of meters through solid rococo, suggests they used a technology that utilized high-frequency vibration rather than copper chisels. Just as the builders of the Nazca Line sang the stones into place, the Nabateans vibrated the water channels into the cliffs. They carved with sound, leaving behind a city that is as much an acoustic instrument as it is a dwelling. If you are still here, the next truth will change how you see the desert forever. We have been taught that the desert is a place where life goes to die, but for the Nabateans, the desert was the ultimate battery. They used the temperature differential between the hot sun on the cliffs and the cool water in the subterranean pipes to generate a form of thermoelectric energy that we are only now beginning to understand. Petra wasn't just a city, it was a power plant, and every drop of water was a part of the circuit. The brain hates to admit that we are living in a downgraded version of the past, but the efficiency of Petra is the ultimate proof. We use massive amounts of energy to move water. They use the Earthico's own heartbeat. As we look at the ruins of the Nabatean Empire, we aren't looking at a primitive culture that vanished. We are looking at a high-tech civilization that was unplugged. The Romans didn't just conquer Petra, they deactivated it. They broke the pipes, filled the tunnels with silt, and turned the most advanced hydrological center on the planet into a tourist attraction for future generations who would never know the truth. To understand the true intent behind the Nabatean infrastructure, you have to look past the surface of the sandstone and descend into the dark. While the temples and tombs capture the sunlight, the real power of Petra lies in the silence of the earth beneath them. Most history advice suggests that the Sidioko's hundreds of subterranean reservoirs were simply backup tanks for a thirsty population. But the engineering of these chambers tells a story of high-pressure physics that mainstream archaeology is not equipped to explain. These were not just containers. They were the primary capacitors of a hydrological engine. You have probably noticed that the sandstone of the Wadi Musa is naturally porous, Yet these ancient reservoirs hold water for centuries without a single leak. This is because the Nabateans didn't just dig holes. They lined their chambers with a proprietary, multi-layered hydraulic plaster that contains traces of high-purity silica and metallic oxides. This wasn't just for waterproofing. In the world of alternative history, this lining turned the reservoirs into resonant chambers. When the water flowed into these pressurized vaults, it wasn't just being stored, a coit was being charged. The movement of the water against the mineral-rich walls created a low-level electromagnetic field, turning the entire city into a massive, liquid-state battery. This brings us to the global grid connection. If you look at a map of the ancient world's primary energetic nodes, Petra sits at a precise intersection that aligns with the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Nazca lines. It is the hydraulic regulator of the planet. While Giza functioned as the power plant, generating energy through telluric currents, and Nazca acted as the atmospheric control panel, Petra was the station that managed the Earth's bloodicoit's water. The Nabateans understood that water is a programmable medium. By moving it through their ceramic pipes at specific velocities and storing it in resonant chambers, they were writing data into the very substance of life. Think about the psychological reality of this. If the water in your city isn't just a resource, but a carrier of a specific frequency, then every time a citizen drinks or bathes, they are being synchronized with the planetary grid. This is the part nobody warns you about. The Nabateans weren't just masters of the desert. They were the architects of human harmony. By managing the frequency of the water, they managed the mental state of the population. This is why Petra remained a zone of absolute peace and stability for centuries while the rest of the world was engulfed in the fires of the Bronze Age collapse. They were shielded not by walls, but by a signal. You might have noticed that the most famous reservoirs, like the one located directly beneath the floor of the treasury, are built in perfect geometric ratios that mirror the acoustics of a cathedral. This wasn't for aesthetics. These ratios were designed to amplify the heartbeat of the earth. The water acted as a transducer, picking up the seismic vibrations of the planet and converting them into a stable, calming frequency that permeated the entire canyon. Petra was a sanctuary of resonance. But the mystery goes deeper. Recent classified scans of the plateau have revealed a secondary, much larger grid of ceramic pipes buried hundreds of feet below the known city. These deep-line conduits don't lead to the fountains or the baths. They lead directly toward the jagged mountains of the Sinai. This suggests that Petra was just the surface terminal for a subterranean network that stretched across continents. The Nabateans were the plumbers of a global machine. They were tasked with maintaining the liquid data that connected the great centers of the founders. The brain hates to admit that we are living in a world that has been unplugged, but the state of Petra today is the ultimate evidence. When the Roman legions finally breached the city, they didn't just come for the gold. They came with engineers whose specific mission was to break the heart of the machine. They targeted the primary junction boxes of the ceramic piping system and filled the central reservoirs with lead and silt. They understood that to conquer the Nabateans, they didn't need to kill the people. They just needed to kill the frequency. The Rose-Red City became a ghost because its life support system was systematically deleted. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the sense of loss you feel when walking through the silent sick is the residual memory of a deactivated world. You are walking through the skeleton of a supercomputer, a place where the water once spoke to the stones. If we took this seriously, our modern cities would be built around the principles of resonance rather than just efficiency. We would realize that the energy crisis is a man-made illusion, created when we abandoned the natural, hydrological power of the Earth's grid. This is the relatability effect of the ancient world. We look at our own smart technology and believe we are the first to be connected. But the Nabatean reservoirs prove that the Earth has been online for much longer than we are told. The water wasn't just for survival, it was for synchronization. As we move into the next phase of this investigation, we have to ask the most terrifying question of all. Where did the founders go when the grid was deactivated? The evidence points to a hidden chamber deep within the Adair Plateau, a place where the final handshake between the Earth and the stars was recorded before the water stopped flowing. The next part of this truth will examine the echo chamber Sokoth specific rooms in Petra where the stone was carved to mimic human DNA, and the disturbing discovery that the city was designed to function as a biological storage unit for a consciousness that is not entirely human. The water was the key, the desert was the battery, and the city was the vessel for a future that was never supposed to be forgotten. Most history advice is not truthful because it assumes that the structures in Petra were built to be seen, when in reality, they were built to be hardened not by the ears, but by the very cells of your body. We are told the high-reaching facades and the hollowed-out caves were funeral monuments for the elite, but if you step inside the central chambers of the royal tombs, you notice a pattern break that defies burial logic. The walls are not just smooth. They are carved with a mathematical precision that creates a perfect acoustic vacuum. These are the echo chambers, and they were designed as biological storage units for a frequency that matches the vibration of human DNA. You have probably noticed that standing in these rooms feels different to a strange pressure in your chest, a sudden clarity of thought, or a sense that the silence is heavy. This is not your imagination. It is the hardware at work. The Nabateans understood that the double helix of our DNA is essentially a biological antenna that responds to sound. By carving the chambers into specific, nonlinear geometric ratios, they created a resonance trap. The water flowing through the hidden pipes beneath the floor acted as a liquid processor, while the chambers themselves functioned as the hard drive. They weren't storing bodies. They were storing the genetic blueprints of a consciousness that was never meant to die. This truth will change how you see the carvings on the walls. What we interpret as decorative friezes and abstract patterns are actually visual representations of frequency waves. In the world of alternative history, these chambers were used for a process of genetic recalibration. The elite unit of the Nabatean Sokoth technicians of the liquid Gridikowold enter these rooms to have their biological code cleansed by the resonant frequency of the desert stones. They were the first to understand that the human body is a temporary vessel, but the information within our DNA can be preserved indefinitely if the resonance is correct. Think about the sheer impossibility of the stone cutting. To create an echo chamber that resonates at the exact frequency of a DNA strand requires a knowledge of biology and physics that we are only now rediscovering with supercomputers. The Nabataeans used the same vibrational technology that built the Nazca lines to tune the sandstone of Petra. They treated the mountain as a living organism. If we took this seriously today, our medical technology wouldn't rely on chemicals and surgery. It would rely on the architecture of sound. We would realize that the Rose-Red City was actually a planetary hospital, a place where the human spirit was maintained through geological resonance. But there is a disturbing layer to this discovery. If these chambers could store genetic information, then Hokor Watokoi is currently being held in the deep, unmapped vaults beneath the Adair Plateau. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does. And the fear that mainstream archaeology feels regarding these tombs is an emotional anchor that points toward a terrifying reality. They aren't excavating certain areas because they are afraid of what happens when the signal is reactivated. There are reports of classified sensors detecting a biological hum coming from the rock face during the solar solstice, a sign that the echo chambers are still in standby mode, holding the data of a civilization that is waiting for the right frequency to return. The transition from a nomadic tribe to the guardians of a genetic library is the part nobody warns you about. We are told the Nabateans vanished into the desert, but the alternative truth is that they didn't leave. Yakathy uploaded. They used the echo chambers to transfer their consciousness into the frequency of the stones themselves. They became the city. Petra is not a ruin. It is a dormant collective of the founders, waiting for the water to flow again and for the grid to reawaken. This is the psychological reality of our managed existence. We look at these monuments and see the past, but the stones are looking at us and seeing the future. The 200-kilometer migration of Stonehenge was the lens, the Nazca lines were the motherboard, and Petra is the memory. As the magnetic field of the Earth shifts and our own DNA begins to respond to the changing vibrations of the planet, the echo chambers are starting to resonate once more. The silence of the desert is ending, and the unknown is about to speak through the very rocks we thought were dead. Most history advice wants you to believe that the silence of Petra is the silence of the grave, rather than the silence of a machine that is simply waiting for its next command. The final secret of the Nabateans does not lie in the crowded canyons of the city center, but high above, on the isolated plateau of Ad-Dair, at the structure known as the monastery. We are told this was a sacred temple, but if you examine its position relative to the surrounding mountain peaks, you realize it is the primary transmission tower for the entire liquid grid. This was the site of the celestial Handshakeakoth final moment of synchronization between the Earthico's hydrological energy and a consciousness that exists far beyond our atmosphere. You have probably noticed that the monastery is significantly larger and more austere than the treasury, with a massive stone urn crowning its facade. In the world of alternative history, this urn was not a decoration. It was the housing for a crystalline resonator brought from the same source as the Stonehenge bluestones. This was the router of the ancient world. When the reservoirs below were filled and the pressure reached its peak, the energy was channeled upward through the sandstone veins of the mountain to this very spot. The monastery was designed to broadcast the genetic data stored in the echo chambers directly into the void, ensuring that the legacy of the founders was backed up in the stars. This brings us to the final settlementicoth moment. The Roman Empire arrived not to build, but to destroy. The official narrative says the Nabataeans were simply absorbed into the empire, but the physical evidence suggests a tactical execution. The Romans were the cleanup crew for a force that decided the Nabatean experiment had become too powerful. They didn't just occupy the city. They performed a surgical deactivation of the liquid grid. They understood that if the water stopped flowing in the specific patterns required by the stone, the connection to the stars would be severed. They filled the diversion tunnels with lead and redirected the sacred springs, effectively unplugging the Earthico's most advanced communication hub. Information doesn't spread, but emotion does, and the psychological horror of this realization is that we are the heirs to a broken system. The Great Reset that ended the Nabatean era was designed to keep humanity isolated, trapped on a planet without its primary data link. We look at the dry channels of Petra and see a tragedy of climate change, but we should be seeing a crime of galactic proportions. The technology to turn the desert into a garden and the human body into a vessel for eternal consciousness was deleted by an administrative force that prefers us to be manageable, thirsty, and disconnected. But the final settlement is not yet complete. If you are still here, the truth you need to understand is that the hardware was never fully removed. It was only paused. The echo chambers still hold the frequency of our DNA, and the reservoirs, though filled with silt, still resonate with the heartbeat of the planet. There is a hidden chamber deep within the Ad-Dair plateau, sealed with a technology that responds only to the correct hydrological pressure. As the Earth's magnetic field continues to shift, the deep-seated water tables are beginning to rise once more. The pipes are starting to hum. The Nabataeans didn't vanish in a history. They are waiting in the frequency. The brain hates to admit that we are not the masters of our own destiny, but the reactivation of the liquid fortress is already beginning. The signal is searching for its next operator. The question is no longer how they carved a city out of the rock without wasting a drop of water. The question is what happens to us when the water starts flowing again and the final handshake is reestablished. The desert is waking up, and the debt of history is about to be paid in full. The silence of the rose-red city is finally coming to an end, but as the liquid grid of Petra begins to hum once more, a much larger mystery is waiting to be uncovered. If you think the management of our world ended with the Nabateans, you haven't seen the evidence of the global network they left behind. To see how the Nazca lines and the pyramids of Giza are currently aligning for the next planetary reset, you need to watch this investigation right here. The water is rising, the signal is clear, and the truth is no longer buried. We'll see you in the next chapter.